All right, welcome. We're back. I've got Brian CROFTS, who's the Chief Product Officer at PENDO. You have the lucky job of building product for product people.
That's right.
So we're going to talk a bit about SaaS today. We're going to be talking about managing SaaS teams, how the difficulties, how to think about it. So I wanted to start off with just kind of setting the baseline of what makes SaaS different or what makes it difficult today.
Yeah. So we were just talking about this backstage, and there's a lot of aspects to SaaS that make it difficult. I think if you think about it kind of at the macro level, like the definition of SaaS is obviously software as a service. And so that means that you have constantly reoccurring revenue. And of course, the goal is not just to acquire customers, but it's to engage them and to provide value in a way that they then come back. And then you've got this idea of reoccurring revenue, which is the thing that's really driving all these high valuations. And so with all of that said, you've got venture capitalism right now that's really defining what we call SaaS metrics. And these SaaS metrics that have really been established over the past few years are actually difficult to achieve. I mean, and it's this idea that you're never done. Now, from a product lens perspective, given that's my function, it's this idea of constantly providing value, constantly shipping products and features. And so it's this just complex feeling of it's never done. You've never satisfied every metric. You're constantly balancing the idea of high engagement, high sentiment, and all for purposes of, did we get the renewal? And then not only renewal, but then did we actually land a customer and expand and get that expansion revenue, right? And so I think the biggest challenge is that it's mature enough right now. We've kind of hit SaaS at scale where these metrics are now embraced and understood, and it is the measure and is the bar by which everything is measured.
I think the nice part is that we're seeing is that the product teams have even more influence today
Absolutely,
than they did before. One thing that keeps coming up is this idea of product-led.
Yep.
How do you define that for inside of PENDO?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is a conversation that we're starting to see more and more. And it from anything from companies should be product-led or product should be leading, and I think just even the word product-led, there's some misnomers there or misunderstandings of what that means. For us, it does not mean that product is leading the company. Right. But what it does mean, I actually like to think about it the other way, which is how are the different organizations outside of the product team being product-led? Okay. And so, for example, I like to think of, let's say, a CS team. How do we ensure that the product is so good and it solves their clients' problems without the help of CS? Or, for example, if you're product-led on a sales side, you have a product that people can use and play with so that by the time they start having conversations with the sales team, they understand the value of it, right? And so, and then like marketing, if you have an amazing product, then it's, people talk about it, right? And it's easier to share the value if people already understand it. So, it just kind of goes back to, at least the way we do it at PENDO, is that I make sure that the executive team that I work with, that they're always challenging and pushing me to have a better product, and not just for our customers, because it makes their life easier. Right. And so, if you have a really good product, it kind of solves all the problems. It's easier to market, it's easier to sell. Going back to the SaaS metrics, you retain more, you're able to expand because you're proving value. And so I think it's just as a product guy, all it does is put more pressure on me to make sure that I'm not necessarily leading the company, but I'm making sure that the product is world class.
And while you're not leading the company, you can no longer say, well, why isn't sales selling? Because
That's
then people
right.
come back to you and say, well, why isn't the product better?
That's right. And so then it always comes back to the product.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I always walk down our sales floor and just kind of mumble, like, oh, this product's so good it sells itself. Now, the reality, and then I get a bunch of like, screw you, CROFTS. But the idea is like that's actually what I aspire to become, right? Is that the product does sell itself. Not to put salespeople out of job. Then you got salespeople who we demand more of them. They do the more complex sale, the larger enterprise. And so we really think that the better the product is, you just start solving lots of problems, right?
So one thing that has come up a lot at the conference has been kind of organizational structure.
Yeah.
I'd be curious, how have you set up your team for success? How has it even changed as you guys have grown?
Yeah, so so when I joined PENDO, not quite 3 years ago, we had a really small team. I think I had one product manager, a couple of designers, so we were very, very small. Today we're over 30.
Wow.
And the way that we've scaled, we've scaled in very traditional ways. Like at the end of the day, as we add more products and we add more features, we have more engineers and more call it feature teams, or there's a lot of different names for these, but we're engineers, QA, product management, design, engineering. And as we've scaled that, obviously we've scaled numbers of product managers, designers. We always try to maintain a one-to-one relationship or one-to-one ratio of product manager and design.
Interesting.
And in fact, we're even looking to overinvest in that, where it might be like 1.5 designers on average to a feature team, just because we have such an emphasis on user experience and design, like every company should. And so we have that very traditional product management, design roles. In my unique case, we have corporate development, business development, and we do that because we want to make sure that these functions accelerate our roadmap. Okay. They're not doing something else. They're doing something that's very aligned with our strategy. So we have that. We also have data science. We have all these different roles. But the newest role that we have, we created a team called Product Ops. So I have a director of Product Ops, and she has 2 individuals that work for her. And it's been a thing that's we've been talking about a lot, and it's evolved, and we've seen so many benefits from having that, call it new department inside the product team.
What kind of projects are they taking on? What are they helping to tackle inside of the company?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if I take a step back for a minute, and you think, in operations is a big word, but if you think about it, operations has always been part of a product management role. So if you think about the operational side of connecting the dots with all of the frontline employees, whether it's CS, whether it's sales, these people are talking with customers every day, and so we need to operationalize, how we connect and get those inputs. But we also need to operationalize things like product launches, right? So, you think about like the primary, and this is why we don't talk a lot about product ops yet. But if you think about the core function of a product manager, it's all about delivery, or discovery and delivery, to keep it really simple. Discovery of problems that can turn into opportunities, that turn into like how we can actually tackle it, to then actually the delivery and execution of it. And so you go through all of this, and it's not easy, right? Like understanding what to build next and then building it in an elegant way that has confidence that it'll take off in the market is a lot of work. And then you layer on top of that this idea that we now have to go execute a perfect launch, right? And so from experience, I've had a couple bad launches, and it wasn't because the product that we developed was amazing. And so another charter of a product ops team is to ensure an incredibly smooth and purposeful product launch. And if you think about product launch, you're not just talking about the product marketing of it and the actual event, but you're talking about training and enabling people like your CS team, your sales team. And so we have a big kind of massive Airtable chart that really highlights all the kind of the check boxes leading up to a product launch. And it involves a lot.
Amazing. Yeah. we struggle with that, right?
Yeah, a lot of teams do.
I would love to hear some of what happened before that you were like, I need a director of product ops, I need 2 people.
Yeah.
What kind of led to that decision?
It's a great question. So, again, when I think about where do we get the biggest gains out of product management? So, you think about like on the spectrum of what product managers do. If I look at a product manager and he's spending more time on the more tactical operational type things, which again, we've been I've launched a lot of products and I've gotten into the weeds of like what's the systematic approach by which we have an effective launch, and it just simply takes away from that core. We're going to yield more innovation if we have product managers spending more time on discovery. And so, frankly, kind of the observation that I had was our teams are not nearly focused on that as much as they should. Like, I want our PMs spending more time with customers, gaining empathy, understanding the problems to the point where innovation occurs. And if they do that more, the company is going to look at the product team and saying, wow, we're getting way more out of it than we have in the past. And so I think it just stemmed from a desire to be more innovative. Yeah. I think the other thing is, I felt like, as we scale and as any company scales, you always want to be intentional, but you find you're making mistakes all over the place. And so we said, how do we not make these little mistakes as we scale? How do we make sure we have a flawless launch? And honestly, it took a really bad launch to kind of wake me up and to say, we're asking too much of our product managers, and they're not doing the things that only they can do. And therefore, we said it's so important, product launches and making sure revenue teams and CS teams we're able to hear from them. Let's make it somebody's job. And that's kind of always been a mantra for us, is like, if it's important, make it somebody's job. And so we made it somebody's job, and we're seeing a lot of success. I mean, I worry a lot less about it launching, us having a successful launch. And then I think the one last thing about a product ops is, we first started talking about product-led. If you think about product-led as the outcome, meaning every department is leveraging the product in a way to help their job, you kind of think of product ops as the enabler of that, right?
Kind of the glue, right?
It's the glue.
Yeah.
And so the way I think about product ops is their customers are internal customers, right? So our product ops team wants to make sure that our sales is leveraging the product, or that we have a trial experience or a play before you buy kind of a scenario. And so they're really emphasize that. So it's not just product launches and operational aspects, it's also enabling this idea, this outcome of being product-led.
So you talked a bit about like the PM's role in research, and how do you enable that? And what kind of philosophies do you guys adhere to internally to make sure that's done properly? Yeah,
I mean, so it's kind of like, if you work for me, you have to spend time with customers. And I think if you kind of look in the spectrum of, I spend all my time with my engineers versus I spend all my time with customers, we want to be kind of closer to that. I spend a lot of time with customers, because that's when, again, that's the biggest leverage a PM can have, is if they have the insights, the stories that inspire the engineers to work on something amazing, or at least be aligned to why we're building what we're building. And so, I think at the end of the day, if a product manager on my team is spending more time on delivery and less on discovery, we're kind of missing the point. And so, but we also, again, realize how busy our teams are. And so having product ops allows them to have more time. But we also do, I think, some clever things internally where, it's a little bit more difficult in B2B SaaS to go talk with customers. So before I was at PENDO, I was at Intuit for over a dozen years, and our customers are consumers. So I'm sure 60-70% of the people in here use TurboTax or some, and so yeah, and so like I can go talk to you about your experience. It's really, really easy. But in B2B SaaS, it's a little bit more difficult to talk to all your customers. So we've tried to be thoughtful about how we do that. We talk to customers, we visit customers, we observe them, but we also do things like, our sales team implemented Gong. I don't know if you've heard of Gong, but Gong records all of the sales conversations. And in the sales conversation, it's a tool that I can actually watch. Like it flags, so there's some magic technology that's flagging when somebody talks about mobile or somebody talks about this part of our product. And I can go in and I can listen to that, but I'm not going to listen to the whole call because that's just too time consuming, but I can skip around to areas, let's say, that I'm in charge of. And so what we do is we have like this master Airtable spreadsheet that has every call that we've done, and the product manager has to tag themselves to it, and they can indicate whether it was a visit or whether it was listening to a call on Gong. And the power about doing that is I can do it at any time of the day. Right. And so we're trying to be thoughtful and creative about how our product managers can connect with customers at a very scalable and efficient way. And then I think third, the other form of interacting with customers is obviously less personal, but it's actually going in and looking at data and looking at behavioral data and seeing how people are using your product. Like, what are they actually doing? And then second, that's good, but it's not as powerful. Second is actually listening and having mechanisms like we just launched a product to incorporate or to help get feedback and product requests and so by looking at both the qual and the quant, I'm also able to get an understanding and even empathy of what the customer needs, where they're thriving, where they're struggling. And so we think of, there's a lot of tools that enable that. But at the end of the day, if my team, and I'm looking at a couple of them right now, if they're not out talking with customers and they're not observing and they're not able to articulate the pain that they see, then we're not going to get those insights that lead to big innovation.
Yeah. Let's talk about the big innovation, right? Because we can often use data to get the incremental gains, which is great, right? How do you guys approach those big leaps where you see a problem, you're not currently solving it, and data's not going to tell you how to solve it?
It's not going to tell you how to solve it, but data can. So, for example, we one of the things that our data and when I think about data, I think about both again behavioral data and what people actually do, but I also think about the sentiment data, the qual data that's coming into our platform as well. And if anything, what that does is we start looking for trends. Like, we're starting to hear a lot about the ease of use when it comes to setup or the first use experience. And then we kind of take a step back and say, there's nobody really on our team that's hyper-focused on that. And again, going back to if it's important, we should make it somebody's job. And so what that turns on is, okay, now we need to go through a discovery process. And so even up until that point, no innovation has happened, but the data has said, you might want to actually think about this. And so that kicks off a discovery process. And as we get more into the discovery, we're able to articulate the pains, but then also to articulate the opportunity. We're able to kind of lay it out and say, gosh, how do we solve this problem in a way that's innovative or in a way that maybe others are not doing? And so I think it starts there. It helps you ask the right questions. But if you're not getting out and proving some of your hypotheses or thesis, then you're not going to be innovative. And so it is a process. And I think then the innovation comes from, hundreds of hours of observation, of experimenting, and ultimately getting the feedback if it's working.
There's kind of a cultural thing, right? Especially with SaaS, especially venture capital, right? It's all about hitting the next metric, the next milestone. How do you justify the time for that type of research, and how do you get buy-in when other people's concerns may be either more short-term or different from what that research might indicate?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because if we were kind of off in product la land, right, where we're doing discovery, we have so much empathy, we're being innovative, and then on the flip side, sales is not hitting their numbers. Right. There's a inconsistency, and it's actually going to create maybe hostility is the wrong word, but it's going to create some dissonance between these organizations. So one of the things that we're also really comfortable with doing as a team, and by the way, product ops actually helps facilitate this, is, we want to make sure that, like if we're really in touch with our customers, we also want to talk with the sales team and say, you think this is like you're going to drive a number, or this is going to help, and so I would say we also bring in our sales and CS teams to help us prioritize. And so it's a very cross-functional effort. And sometimes at the risk of innovation, we'll say, you know what, we're going to ship these two things because it's going to close the narrative that the sales team needs to be able to sell this more effectively. And so the way we look at it, so as much as we are product-led, we also are very business-focused, and we say at the end of the day, like, we can be product-led and innovative and stuff like that as long as we're thriving as a business. And so there is a connectivity to the business and the business. So for example, my team knows where we're at from an ARR perspective anywhere in the quarter. We make all of that incredibly visible. And so sometimes we have frank conversations about, let's ship this, let's get it out. It feels less strategic, but it'll help drive the bottom line.
Nice. We have a couple minutes. I wanted to see any questions from the audience.
Hi. Hello? There we go.
Gotcha, yeah.
Great. I'm also in B2B SaaS.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, how do you then foster the communication back to the feedback loop between sales and product once product delivers the features that have been asked to close the narrative loop?
Yeah, so it's another great question. So we have a couple, I'll call it like operating mechanisms that we have in place. So once a month as a product team, just a product team, we get together to talk about the roadmap. And in that roadmap discussion, we will bring in all of our kind of data points, not just from our customers, but also from sales, marketing, CS, and things like that. And then, which I think is fairly unique, we have every 2 weeks a meeting where the leader of product ops, who has been spending time for the past 2 weeks making sure that they have the prioritized needs of both sales and CS, and she brings that to the table, and we have a discussion and to make sure that those individuals, those internal stakeholders are actually heard and that we can incorporate it. And so what you'll see is, we as the product team or product managers very focused on the external customer, our customer. Product ops is focused on internal customer, and we won't actually align and nail down the roadmap until both are heard and both have been reconciled. And then what we do is when we do share out our roadmap, we actually do highlight the things that we are working in to either help close deals or working in because the sales see it as very strategic and important part of their narrative. So I guess the way to think about it, there's a lot of different ways to solve it, but the underlying challenge or opportunity is communication. You have to find out the ways to circle back, to close the loop with sales. The biggest mistake that I see people make is that they go and they start spending time with sales and CS to listen to their feedback, and then they put it aside and go work on the stuff they think is most important. And that's a really dangerous thing, because then you start to create an organization that doesn't believe that you're really listening to them, and then they stop giving that critical part of feedback that's important, not just for the product, but to be a viable, thriving business. So my recommendation would just be to, if you're having those conversations, make sure that you have a mechanism that helps close that loop. That's how we do it. It's relatively early on, but it's been super effective. Because now you have product managers when they're up on stage in front of the company, and they're not just talking about their vision and things they're building, but they're also talking about things that are helping close the ARR gap if with this quarter. And so, because then there's no dissonance. There's no, it's a kind of more harmony that way. We're all solving for the same thing ultimately.
Yeah, I imagine that the stakeholders listening can hear their concerns in the solution.
Yes.
And that makes all the difference.
Yeah, and they're like, okay, they're listening, and then I'm going to provide more fact. In fact, I'm going to be, if they're listening to me, I'm actually going to spend more time prioritizing the number one thing, because if I advocate this really hard and say these other things are not as important, they'll really listen. And so, and by the way, this is true with our customers. If we create a mechanism to create feedback and product requests, we need to make sure that we close the loop, and that's, or at least establish the loop so that they understand that they're being heard. And maybe it's, hey, we love your feedback, keep it coming. We're actually prioritize this over this, but at least they know they've heard. Or, wow, like your feedback was awesome, and we're actually getting ready to ship the product that you wanted. So.
All right, that is the time that we have. Brian, you'll be around.
I will be around,
Brian.
yeah. The rest.
Let's give a big round of applause.
Thank
Brian.
you.